Yeah, so the Git vulnerability that I've found is an interesting one where if you clone a Git repository, it potentially can run code. Um, and so this actually builds on a previous vulnerability where if there was a difference in case, so in the file name, when you check out a Git repository, you have a .git directory. Um, if you're on Windows, .git with capital letters is the same directory. But if you're on a Unix system, or sorry, if you're on a Linux system, for example, then .git with capital letters is a different directory. On macOS, the file system is case insensitive, so it's the same as Windows in that that file name would be the same as with lowercase. So anyway, what you do is on a Linux system, you produce a repository where you've say got a .git directory, which is in uppercase, but it's actually a symlink to something like .git/hooks, which is where the scripts that Git runs on different operations live. And so then what happens is through that, you basically make it such that when someone checks out a repository, it runs the Git hook that you just provided in your checkout. So
Is
it
is
then
that
runs your code.
so on Linux? That vulnerability doesn't work, right? Because I'm looking for the dot lowercase git, or will I happily respect it case insensitively via Git code?
That won't work on Windows. And this is, to be clear, this is a previous vulnerability that was fixed. And the way they fixed it is they said if you have .git with any arrangement of characters, we'll just not allow that. Um, so this is now fixed by at least that particular one is fixed. And they added some defense in depth as well. So there are a bunch of other possibilities which were limited. It could be just also to go back, it could be a problem on Linux if you did use a case insensitive file system, which XFS or at least X4, you can turn this on.
Not by default for sure.
Yeah,
It's not, but
yeah, I
I'm
wouldn't
sure you
wouldn't
can turn it
recommend
on
it.
a lot of things. You can actually make a Mac file system case sensitive, or at least you used to be able to.
Yes,
And it's
yes,
great at breaking everything.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, so we said this wasn't a problem on Linux, but I happened to be looking at this because I was just doing a bit of looking at Git and some other possible vulnerabilities. And I realized because you can have control characters in file names on Linux, you can use the carriage return, which is not really used anymore. So this is going back to the old early days of computing. Carriage return is like when a typewriter puts itself back to the, so if you've got a typewriter here, it puts itself back like that, and it's actually a physical movement. And then line feed is when it moves down a line. So
That's like the whack R in or whack R whack in instead of the whack
yes,
in.
so yeah, so CR is slash R or backslash. So actually, yeah, so CR is actually slash R and is carriage return. And then line feed is just the normal new line, which is slash N. And so on Linux and Unix, traditionally, it's just a slash N for a line ending. But on Windows, it's slash R slash N traditionally. And so Git has code that strips off slash R slash N. But because you can have a file name that has either of those in, you can make a file name that ends with a slash R or carriage return. And then Git, when it reads its configuration file, will strip that off. So if you have, for example, a directory that is foo followed by a carriage return, when Git then reads that back from a configuration file, it becomes just foo. And because of how Git did validation, it did that validation on the point before it wrote that to the file. And then when it read it back, it didn't have a carriage return on it anymore. And so you basically bypass the validation and then caused confusion. And you would it would think it was talking about foo with a carriage return on the end, but it was actually talking about just the directory
And
foo
I'm
or
assuming the next step is replace foo with dot git.
so you could do that, or you could just make foo into a symlink that goes somewhere. So there are multiple ways to
Okay.
pull off this attack. But yes, basically, yes, foo with a carriage return or .git with a carriage return, either of those things will result in some level of confusion.